So this morning we're with Keith Taylor, who's a Surrey County Councillor for Cheer, and also chairman of the local committee with responsibility, one of which is the responsibility for traffic in Guildford and the surrounding area. And the subject we're talking about is the proposed trial of changes to Walnut Tree Close. So thank you for being interviewed, Keith. Do you think that the consultation that took place 2 years ago was wide enough? It received 630 questionnaire responses, but most of those weren't from just motorists that use the road.
I think it was as wide as we could realistically expect. In fact, the report that came to the committee compared it with a number of similar consultations that had been done on other schemes in other parts of Surrey, and in those terms it was actually quite good. I'm afraid you can't force people to respond. Quite a lot was done in terms of both from what I can remember, people coming along to sort of places in the town centre and putting up stands. It wasn't just an online web thing, but even so, it's difficult to get a lot of busy people to respond.
Now there are two trial options proposed: one to close Walnut Tree Close to through traffic, and the other one to make it one way. So won't this just displace traffic onto surrounding roads, especially Woodbridge Road and Guildford Park Road?
Well, any change you make bluntly to the highways network in a busy place like Guildford is going to have, winners and losers. The issue is not really to find something that involves absolutely no inconvenience to anybody. Otherwise, we would never do anything. We have to, as a committee, we have to take views on are there going to be sort of more winners than losers, and bearing in mind the pressure there was. This whole thing started with a petition by 340 residents of Walnut Tree Close back in 2013, and also a lot of detailed work by highways engineers had suggested that it would that either option would alleviate the problems on gyratory, both in terms of safety and congestion. But obviously the purpose of the trial is to confirm that's what happens.
But do you think you've balanced the needs and wishes of the motorists with the residents carefully enough?
Yes, I believe so, because the people using the gyratory are obviously motorists as well. Yes, there are people, pedestrians cross the gyratory, but while we were undoubtedly paid full attention to the sort of requests from residents and in Walnut Tree Close, nonetheless we were also looking at in a wider sense as to, on balance, would it improve the situation for motorists in the beginning of town, and subject to the trials we're doing, we hope and believe that it will.
Okay, and unfortunately in some ways the result ended up with a third of the people in favour of option 1, a third in favour of option 2, and a third in favour of neither option. So how will the council go about deciding which options to trial?
Okay, the way the committee looked at this is that 2/3 of the respondents were in favour of doing something about Walnut Tree Close and a third against. Yes, there was then, if you like, a sub-decision as to whether they were pro-option 1 or pro-option 2, but on that basis the committee took the view, I think reasonably enough, that the clear majority of people who took the trouble to respond were in favour of doing something, and the final decision will be based not just on looking back at what people wanted, but basically how the trial goes. If we quite clearly seem to be getting more benefits and/or more problems from one and t'other, then that's the main reason for doing the trial.
So when should we expect the trials to commence, and how long will they last?
Okay, the latter is easier, sort of something approaching 6 months for each. The former,
for each option?
For each option. The form was more difficult. What's been very frustrating, unfortunately, we hoped to have started all this quite some time ago, but one of the turning points identified in the original scheme, we ran into sort of legal problems with a property owner who initially thought would cooperate and then wasn't able to in the end. So we've had to look around for alternative things of that. we think we're well on the way to finding an alternative solution with some land that's owned by Guildford Borough Council, but there's still some final checks to that, in particular with the Environment Agency, because we're talking about land up near Woodbridge Meadows, right next to the river, and so we're hoping it may still start later this year. But the reason that in the recent Horizon 2 report that triggered all this, it talked about November to March, which I know is was deliberately sort of recognising that it might take some time to, whenever you get lawyers involved, etc., it takes some time to tie up these things. But we're very anxious to get on with it as soon as we possibly can.
Okay, and finally, if the council really wants to tackle traffic problems in Guildford, don't they need a much bigger, holistic plan?
Oh, indeed so, and there is, such a plan. If you look at the sort of transport, this in itself was one of 7 schemes that were part of a particular funding bid to the local enterprise partnership, the government in effect, and some of which, like the turn right down Millbrook car park, has already been implemented, for example, and I think is proving quite successful. So it's and there's a further round of bids going into or has gone into the local enterprise partnership for further work. So there is a wider plan, but inevitably we have to implement it, or try and implement it part by part as funding becomes available, and indeed physically as it's possible. You can only do so much on the same road network in the same time period, and unfortunately there's a hell of a lot else going on in the town centre. A rebuild of Farnham Road Bridge, to quote but one, and so on, which we have to take account of.
Okay, thank you very much.